morning, atheists, agnostics, skeptics, whatever you like to call yourself, you are welcome here. At Seattle Atheist Church, we call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural promoted from the podium. Our church was founded on the principles of scientific naturalism and secular ethics. Truth claims are attempted here, and we stand ready to revise our thinking in light of new information. We attempt to be excellent to all conscious beings, and we believe in good because good works in non-mysterious ways. If that sounds about right to you, then you are probably in the right place. So the talks here are given by members of the community, and today we're going to have a talk called A Stoic's Guide to a Good Life by Tyrell. And before that, I have one announcement, which is that we do have movie night now scheduled. It's going to be August 11th. And last time we had movie night, it was really fun, so I urge you to come to it. We don't know what movie yet, but so that gives you a chance to suggest movies. And please sign up for it on the website, and then we'll send you directions and stuff on how to get there if you sign up for it, okay? So thanks very much. Without further ado.
Hey everybody, I'm going to talk today about Stoicism. So, the story of Stoicism starts with Zeno of Citium, and he was a wealthy merchant who was in a storm and shipwrecked around 300 BC. He lost everything he owned and found himself stranded in Athens. When he got there, he went to the library and was interested in some stuff that he read talking about Socrates, and asked about these philosophers that he was hearing about, where he was pointed to one of the teachers of the Cynic school of philosophy. He studied with them for a while before branching out and creating what we now call Stoicism. Stoicism flourished for almost 500 years, in part because it was useful. The Greek and Roman philosophers tried to impart how to live well in their philosophies, so it was kind of like a philosophy of life. One of the rival schools, Epicurus, summed this up well when he said, "Vain is the word of the philosopher whose word does not heal the suffering of any man. Just as there is no profit in medicine that does not expel the diseases of the body, there is no profit in philosophy that does not expel the suffering of the mind." And Stoicism did just that. It influenced everyone from Caesar Augustus to Cicero, and even some more modern psychological ideas like Viktor Frankl's logotherapy and cognitive behavioral therapy. It even influenced early Christian thought. So the Stoics studied logic, physics, and ethics, and they created this metaphor of a garden to sort of talk about how these areas of knowledge related to each other in their study. So they thought logic is like the fence, physics is like the soil, and ethics is like the fruit. And the point of this metaphor was to emphasize the fact that ethics was the most important part of their philosophy, and the other parts of it sort of just served to protect and set up the situation for their ethics. The important thing about their logic is they founded propositional logic and believed that knowledge can be achieved by pure expertise and collective judgment. This differed from the skeptics that were around at that time who didn't think that you could obtain true knowledge. And the important thing about their physics was they believed that causation is universal. So they were very deterministic in their physics. Their ethics had, like other Hellenistic ethics, virtue in them. So they believed in 4 fundamental virtues, which were wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. And those virtues actually later went on to become the cardinal virtues in Christianity. So you can see some of their influence on them there. The most important part of their ethics, though, was how to live well. They thought that living a good life meant achieving apatheia, which translates best to what we would call like peace of mind or tranquility. And nowadays, when we think about a Stoic, we might think of someone who doesn't feel any emotions at all. When we say Stoic, we mean someone who doesn't feel any joy or pain or grief or pleasure, and that's half right. In the traditional Stoic school of philosophy, they didn't seek to banish all emotions, they sought to banish negative emotions. So they recognized that things like anger and fear and grief and envy were not conducive to living a good life, and they tried to think of ways to sort of limit those emotions. So as well as philosophers, they were kind of, in a way, psychologists. And they created some techniques for preventing these negative emotions. The first technique was something called negative visualization. So the Stoics thought that you should regularly think about all the bad things that could possibly happen to you. This seems kind of paradoxical at first as a recipe for happiness, but the Stoics understood that no matter what you do, bad things are going to happen, and bad things are particularly bad for people who expect only good things to happen to them. So when we think about hardships that we might endure, we lessen the impact when they actually happen. It's kind of like buying insurance for your emotions, in a way. Epictetus said, you should begin each day by telling yourself that today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness. So you can see sort of how they thought about thinking about bad things. The second thing, or benefit of negative visualization, is humans are unhappy in part because we are insatiable. They seemed somewhat aware of what we now call hedonic adaptation, and this is the process by which you fulfill a desire, and that desire is immediately replaced by newer, grander desires. And we've all done this before with things that we've bought, jobs that we've gotten, relationships we've formed, where you really valued the thing until you got it, and then it's kind of old news and you don't desire it as much anymore. This has been empirically studied and shown that it doesn't produce happiness. So we've done research where we've tracked lottery winners actually and tracked their happiness over an extensive period of time and found that their happiness level goes up for a little while and then after a few months goes back down and is at pretty much the same level as a control group that we've studied in a similar way. So negative visualizations can help forestall this process. And furthermore, they can even help reverse this process, creating desires for things that we already have and are accustomed to. Seneca says, remember that all we have is on loan from fortune, which can reclaim it without permission. Seneca advises that we contemplate the loss of things that we love, like our partner, our job, our car, our home. He suggests we contemplate the loss of our ability to see or hear, for example, or ability to swallow food or walk. He even suggests that we contemplate our own death. Now, when I'm explaining Stoicism to someone, they'll stop me here and probably say, this seems really pessimistic. And I like to think of it this way. A pessimist sees the glass as half empty. An optimist sees the glass as half full. A Stoic sees the glass as half full and then reflects on how lucky they are to even have a glass when it could have been broken or stolen or lost, etc. So in addition to negative visualization, Stoics recommend that we regularly reflect on what they call the Dichotomy of Control. And basically the way this works is there's some things that are under our control. So think about our opinions, our desires, and our aversions. And then there are other things that are not under our control, like our possessions or our reputation, etc. Epictetus says, it's impossible for happiness and yearning for things to be united. A better strategy is to want only things that can be certainly or easily obtained. So if we want things that are outside of our control, then we must necessarily be disappointed. A logical extension of this is trying to internalize our goals. So if I'm going into a sports match, my goal should be not to win the match, but to play to the best of my abilities. That way, in some sense, I cannot lose. And the Stoics believed that negative emotions were psychological traits, so it made sense to them that by altering our psychological behavior, we would be able to gain control over them, or at least some control. So the Stoics thought we should be indifferent to all things that are outside of our control. This includes social status. We have to be consistent with our indifference. So they thought that if we seek social status, then we're giving others power over us in a way. And they were not fans of giving up their power. They wanted to have control over as much things as possible. They thought this was especially bad if you seek approval of people whose values you reject or who don't have the same values as you. If someone has different values than me and they disapprove of me, then I should be very okay with that. In other words, the Stoics thought. One of the things that we pursue in the name of social status is wealth. And Stoics had varying ideas about wealth, but the important thing is that they were not the Cynics. The Cynics thought that you should live an ascetic life and, get rid of all your possessions and live with as little as possible. The Stoics thought it was okay to enjoy wealth as long as you were not dependent on that wealth in a way. They did have varying opinions on this though. Seneca says the man who adapts himself to his slender means and makes himself wealthy on a little sum is the truly rich man. That's not necessarily saying that you can't enjoy wealth though. They thought about control by a metaphor of a dog on a leash attached to a chariot. So we could think of like a dog on a leash attached to a bicycle today. So if the dog runs alongside the bicycle, then the dog might end up going somewhere that it doesn't want to go. But if the dog tries to pull against the bicycle, not only is it going to end up going somewhere it doesn't want to go, it's also going to be strangled. So they thought about this in relation to control and fatalism. So remember, they were very deterministic. This doesn't mean that they were just sort of like sitting around apathetically resigned to whatever the future has in store for them. If you look at the lives of some of the most famous Stoic philosophers, Seneca was a senator and playwright. He wrote over 20 books and tried to advocate for social progress, like the humane treatment of slaves. Epictetus was born into slavery, but later went on to found his own school of philosophy. And Marcus Aurelius led the Roman Empire through 2 wars, through plague, famine, and the death of most of his children. They mostly meant that we should be deterministic about the past, and that meant don't dwell on the past, basically. Don't dwell on the past isn't the same thing as saying don't think about the past. They thought it was beneficial to think about the past for lessons for the future, but there shouldn't be any if-only thoughts, basically, is what they were trying to get at. Epictetus says, if we want our lives to go well, we should, rather than wanting events to conform to our desires, make our desires conform to events. Stoics believe that you only have one shot at this moment, and you can either spend it wishing that things were different, or you can embrace whatever situation that you're in. They thought that you should refuse to think of how things could be better. So it's sort of like the mirror, the opposite of negative visualization. They thought that you should be fatalistic about other people too. Marcus Aurelius says people do not choose to have the faults that they do. So we should just assume, if somebody's bothering us, that they were fated to be that way. If someone insults us, we should ask ourselves, how informed is the insulter? Are they just saying how things appear to them? If so, that's all they can really do. So if we are insulted by someone and we believe that they've erred in their judgment of us, or that they have some sort of flaw of their character, we should think about them insulting us like a dog barking at us. If I come across a dog that's just like barking at me incessantly, I might make a note of it and think, okay, that dog doesn't like me. But I'm not going to think back on it and be like, oh God, that dog doesn't like me. You know, you're going to move on. That's the way the Stoics recommended that you act when a person insults you too. Epictetus says, remember, what is insulting is not the person who abuses or hits you, but the judgment you make about it. As a result, another person will do you no harm unless you wish it. So, in addition to these techniques, the Stoics thought that you should negative visualize and sometimes live as though those hardships have actually happened. So in addition to the benefits from negative visualization, like hardening yourself from misfortune and appreciating what you have, doing this helps you gain confidence in your ability to endure hardship. And by doing this, the Stoics thought that you would lessen your anxiety about bad things happening. So if you just do nothing but eat stale bread and sleep on the floor and dress in dirty rags for a few days out of the year, then you'll be okay with the possibility of losing your wealth, essentially. And they suggested that you should forego pleasure sometimes. The key word here is sometimes. They, like I said, were not the cynics. They didn't believe in like complete asceticism, but they weren't like the Cyrenaics who believed in hedonistic excess. They were sort of somewhere in the middle. The idea about like foregoing pleasure sometimes was making sure that you had as much control as possible. They thought self-control was really important, so we should enjoy pleasures, but also be circumspect of them. Seneca says that pursuing pleasure is like pursuing a wild beast. On being captured, it can turn on us and tear us to pieces. They thought that intense pleasure is very good at carrying reason away and being very difficult to rein in. So they thought self-denial was an adequate sort of preventative technique of that. Now this seems like a really like hard and weird thing to do, but keep in mind that we do deny ourselves things sometimes. If you've ever dieted or saved money, then you've experienced self-denial. And you've probably experienced how sometimes that can be pleasurable in the long run. And this, to the Stoics, was just another example of that sort of deal. But the Stoics did understand like the difficulty of their philosophy, which is why Seneca suggested meditation to help. Now, what they meant by meditation wasn't like our like modern sort of like mindfulness that's sort of popular right now. They meant more of like a philosophical meditation or keeping like a philosophical diary. At the end of each day, you should reflect on whether your actions were governed by reason or governed by something else, is what they suggested. And fun fact, the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, which is the book that most of my Marcus Aurelius books are coming from, was just that. He actually didn't intend to publish the book. It was just his journal, and it ended up being published later. He, despite his power and being the emperor of Rome, didn't try and push Stoicism on other people or evangelize Stoicism. The Stoics understood that some emotions are reflexive and hard to control. So grief is a prime example of that. They thought that negative visualizations can help and can encourage us to take advantage of the relationships that we have with people while they're still around. But they didn't expect people to not feel any grief at all. Seneca writes to a grieving friend, "Nature requires from us some sorrow. Well, more than this is the result of vanity, but never will I demand of you that you shouldn't grieve at all." So the idea was that we can't eliminate some emotions like grief, but we can try and minimize it in a few ways. One of their techniques for trying to minimize grief was what they call, or what I call, retrospective negative visualization. So upon the death of a loved one, rather than mourn the death, try and think about how thankful you are that they had a life to live at all. Although the Stoics' metaphysics were like way off, they were aware of how lucky we are and fortunate we are to even exist. And they thought that you could take some consolation in that. Seneca handled death quite well when he was accused of conspiring against the infamous dictator Nero and sentenced to kill himself. When the guards were taking him into the room where he was meant to take a sharp knife and cut his veins, his family and loved ones were weeping and crying and pulling at his cloak, and he turned to them and said, "What of your stoicism? What of your philosophy?" Reminding them that they should try their best to govern their emotions with reason, like they had always been doing. And Stoicism isn't perfect. There is no perfect Stoic. For them, it was about practicing and improving and trying to get better at it every single day. These techniques were the Stoics' best attempt at living a good life. And they believed that if implemented, they'd help you enjoy being the person you are, living the life you're living, in the world that you happen to inhabit. So let's talk about it.